Undercover boss saw black woman baking croissants at 4 a.m., then discovered a shocking truth. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the darkness at 3:45 a.m., but Maya Johnson was already awake. She had been for the past 20 minutes, lying in her small studio apartment, staring at the ceiling and mentally preparing for another day of silent rebellion. The same routine she'd followed for 3 years: wake up before dawn, sneak into the bakery like a thief in her own workplace, and create magic that would never bear her name. Maya slipped out of bed, her feet finding the cold hardwood floor. The December morning in Chicago was brutal, with snow piling against her window and the wind howling like an angry spirit. But inside her chest burned a fire that no winter could extinguish, the fire of a woman who knew her worth, even when the world refused to see it. 20 minutes later, Maya stood before the employee entrance of Golden Crust Bakery, fishing for her keys in the pre-dawn darkness. The building loomed before her like a sleeping giant, its windows dark and empty. This was her sanctuary and her prison, the place where her dreams had been both born and buried. The lock clicked open with a soft metallic whisper, and Maya stepped inside. The familiar scent of yesterday's bread and lingering vanilla filled her nostrils. Home and heartbreak rolled into one. She moved through the darkened hallway like a ghost, her footsteps muffled by the rubber soles of her work shoes. Every morning she held her breath during this walk, terrified that Mason might have changed his routine, that he might catch her in the act of reclaiming what was rightfully hers. The kitchen door swung open silently, and Maya flicked on just one overhead light, enough to work by, not enough to draw attention from the street. The massive industrial ovens stood like silent sentinels, cold and waiting. The stainless steel counters gleamed under the harsh fluorescent glow, spotless from the previous night's cleaning. This was her cathedral, and she was about to perform her morning ritual. Maya tied her hair back with practiced efficiency and washed her hands with the devotion of a surgeon. From her personal locker, she retrieved a small wooden box, her treasure chest. Inside lay her most precious possessions, a worn leather notebook filled with her grandmother's handwriting, a set of measuring spoons that had belonged to her mother, and a small vial of vanilla extract from Madagascar that she bought with her own money. She opened the notebook to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Croissants of the heart. That's what her grandmother had called them. The recipe had been passed down through 3 generations of Johnson women, each adding their own secret touch. Maya's contribution was revolutionary, a laminated dough technique that combined rye flour with cultured butter, creating layers so delicate they seemed to dissolve on the tongue while maintaining a depth of flavor that made grown men weep. With the precision of a chemist and the passion of an artist, Maya began to work. She measured the rye flour, not too much, just enough to add that subtle earthiness that made her croissants unique. The cultured butter, imported at great personal expense, went into the mixture at exactly the right temperature. Too cold, and it wouldn't incorporate properly. Too warm, and the magic would be lost. As she worked, Maya's mind drifted to that fateful day 3 years ago when her life changed forever. She had been so young then, so naive. Fresh out of culinary school with stars in her eyes and recipes in her heart, she thought the world was ready for her gifts. She remembered the excitement of developing this very recipe, staying up until 2 a.m. in her tiny kitchen, testing ratios and techniques until she achieved perfection. Her hands moved in familiar patterns, folding the dough with the expertise that came from thousands of repetitions. The lamination process was an art form, creating those paper-thin layers of butter and dough that would puff into golden, flaky perfection in the oven. Each fold had to be precise, each turn calculated. This wasn't just baking, this was architecture in edible form. The first batch went into the oven at exactly 4:30 a.m. Maya set the timer and allowed herself a moment to lean against the counter, watching through the oven window as her creations began their transformation. The dough started to rise, the layers separating and creating those perfect pockets of air that would make each bite a small miracle. She thought about Mason Crawford, the head chef who would arrive at 6 a.m. and find these croissants waiting for him. He would inspect them with the air of a master craftsman examining his work, maybe even making small adjustments to the display to ensure they looked perfect under the bakery's warm lights. Then he would go to his office and update the daily report, listing Mason's signature croissants as the morning special. The injustice of it still burned in Maya's chest like acid. For 3 years, she had watched her creation become the bakery's signature item, the product that had launched them into national recognition. Food bloggers wrote rhapsodic reviews about Mason's innovative use of rye flour and his masterful understanding of European lamination techniques. The bakery had expanded to 12 locations across the Midwest, all on the strength of croissants that Maya baked in secret each morning. She pulled the first batch from the oven, and the aroma that filled the kitchen was nothing short of heavenly. Golden brown, perfectly layered, with a sheen that spoke of butter content that would horrify health-conscious customers and delight everyone else. Maya allowed herself a small smile. After 3 years of this routine, she could still feel pride in her work, even if no one else would ever know it was hers. But something was different this morning. As Maya prepared the second batch, she heard something that made her freeze, the sound of keys jingling outside the employee entrance. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she glanced at the clock, 4:45 a.m. Mason never arrived before 6 a.m., and the cleaning crew didn't start until 5:30. Maya quickly turned off the kitchen light and ducked behind the large mixer, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure whoever was coming could hear it. The door opened with a soft creak, and footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, careful footsteps that seemed to be trying not to make noise. A beam of light swept across the kitchen window, and Maya held her breath. Whoever was out there had a flashlight and was clearly looking for something, or someone. The footsteps moved closer to the kitchen door, and Maya pressed herself against the cold steel of the mixer, praying to become invisible. The footsteps stopped right outside the kitchen door. Maya closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother's hands, weathered from years of kneading dough and shaping dreams. She thought about her mother, who had died before seeing Maya graduate from culinary school. She thought about every morning for the past 3 years when she had snuck into this kitchen to preserve a piece of her family's legacy, only to watch someone else claim credit for her love made manifest. The door handle turned slowly, and Maya Johnson prepared to face whatever consequences awaited her in the darkness. The footsteps retreated, and Maya released the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. False alarm. Probably just the night security guard making his rounds. But the interruption had shattered her morning ritual, bringing back memories she tried so hard to bury. As she emerged from behind the mixer and checked her croissants, Maya's mind drifted back to 3 years ago, when her world had crumbled with the innocence of a forgotten notebook. Fresh out of Le Cordon Bleu Chicago, Maya had been 24 and hungry for success. Not the kind of hunger that gnawed at your stomach, but the deeper kind that lived in your soul, the hunger to create something beautiful, something that mattered. She'd landed the junior baker position at Golden Crust through sheer determination and a portfolio that made the hiring manager's eyes light up like Christmas morning. Those first few months had been magical. Maya would arrive at 5 a.m., her head buzzing with ideas and her hands eager to translate dreams into dough. She worked alongside seasoned bakers who taught her the rhythm of commercial baking, the dance of timing and temperature that separated professionals from home cooks. But Maya wasn't content to simply follow recipes. She was an innovator, a dreamer with flour under her fingernails. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Maya had been experimenting with different flour combinations, trying to recreate a memory from her childhood, her grandmother's croissants that somehow tasted like home and adventure at the same time. Traditional croissants used all-purpose flour, but Maya remembered her grandmother muttering in French about Le Siegel's secret, the secret rye. She'd started small, substituting just 10% of the flour with finely ground rye. The result was interesting but not revolutionary. Then she discovered cultured butter, European-style butter with a tang that added complexity to the dough. The combination was promising, but something was still missing. The real magic happened when Maya perfected her lamination technique. Instead of the traditional threefold method, she developed a fourfold approach that created more layers while keeping the butter at the perfect temperature throughout the process. The result was architectural: croissants with such delicate, defined layers that they looked like golden pastry accordions when you pulled them apart. Maya had been so excited about her creation that she documented everything meticulously. Her small leather notebook became her treasure, filled with precise measurements, temperature notes, timing charts, and even small sketches showing the proper folding technique. She wrote in the margins about how the rye flour needed to be sifted twice, how the cultured butter had to be pounded to exactly the right consistency, how the proving time changed based on kitchen humidity. The notebook rarely left her side during those early months. Maya would flip through it during breaks, making small adjustments and notes. She dreamed of the day she could present her creation to management, maybe even develop a whole line of innovative pastries that would put Golden Crust on the culinary map. That dream died on November 15th, a date burned into Maya's memory like a brand. She'd been rushing to leave after a particularly long shift, helping to prepare for a weekend catering order. In her haste, she'd left the notebook on the small table in the break room, right next to the coffee machine where she'd been reviewing her notes during her afternoon break. Maya discovered her mistake the next morning when she reached for the notebook and found empty air. Panic seized her chest as she retraced her steps, checking every surface, every corner where it might have fallen. She asked other bakers, described the worn leather cover and the ribbon bookmark, but no one had seen it. Lost something important? Mason Crawford had appeared beside her, his voice carrying that condescending tone she'd grown to hate. He was 15 years older than Maya, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. Just some personal recipes, Maya had replied, not wanting to reveal the true importance of what she'd lost. Mason had smiled, the same smile she now recognized as predatory. Well, I'm sure whatever it was, you can recreate it. True bakers don't need to write everything down, right? For weeks later, Mason called a staff meeting. He stood at the front of the kitchen, chest puffed with pride, and announced his latest creation, an innovative croissant that would become the bakery's new signature item. As he described the technique, Maya felt the world tilt on its axis. Every detail, every measurement, every technique he described came directly from her notebook. When Mason brought out a tray of the finished croissants, Maya nearly collapsed. They were perfect, her perfection. The golden color, the delicate layers, even the subtle earthy aroma from the rye flour. He'd executed her recipe flawlessly, probably because he'd had her detailed notes to guide him. I call them Mason's Heritage Croissants, he announced, and the other bakers applauded. The rye flour gives them an old-world complexity, and the lamination technique creates these incredible layers. I've been working on this for months. Maya had stood frozen in the back of the group, watching her dreams crumble like overproof dough. When she finally found her voice, it came out as a whisper. Those are my croissants. The kitchen fell silent. Mason turned to look at her with raised eyebrows, as if she just claimed to have invented fire. Excuse me? The recipe, the technique, I developed all of it. You took my notebook. Mason's expression shifted from surprise to something colder. Maya, I understand you're eager to contribute, but making false claims about senior staff is a serious matter. I've been perfecting this recipe for months. If you have documentation to support your claim, I'd be happy to review it. But Maya had no documentation. It was all in the notebook that had mysteriously disappeared. The other bakers looked at her with a mixture of pity and embarrassment, as if she'd committed some terrible social breach. A 24-year-old junior baker claiming credit for the head chef's creation? Maya never found her notebook, but she found something else that morning, the bitter taste of injustice, and the cold realization that talent alone wasn't enough. In the culinary world, as in many others, credit went to whoever could claim it loudest and longest. Mason's Heritage Croissants became an overnight sensation, launching Golden Crust into regional fame and eventually national recognition. Food critics praised Mason's innovation, and the bakery expanded rapidly. And every morning since then, Maya had risen at 3:45 a.m. to bake croissants in secret, keeping alive the only proof she had left, her hand's memory of creating something beautiful. It was the third Tuesday in January when Maya first noticed him, a man who didn't quite fit the usual rhythm of Golden Crust's morning routine. She had just finished her secret baking session, and was arranging Mason's stolen croissants in the display case when she spotted him through the kitchen's service window. He was tall but carried himself with a deliberate slouch, as if trying to appear smaller than he was. A faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, work boots that had seen better days, and a navy blue uniform that marked him as part of the cleaning crew. But something about him felt off, like an actor playing a role he hadn't quite mastered. Maya watched as he pushed a mop bucket across the dining area floor, his movements careful and methodical. Most cleaners worked with the efficiency of repetition, their bodies moving on autopilot, while their minds wandered elsewhere. This man worked like he was studying every inch of the space, like he was memorizing the layout rather than simply cleaning it. "Who's the new guy?" Maya asked Janet, the morning supervisor who arrived at 5:30 to open the front of house. Janet glanced through the window and shrugged. "Started last week. Company sent him from the temp agency. Quiet type, keeps to himself." The man looked up then, as if sensing their conversation, and his eyes met Maya's through the glass. They were intelligent eyes, sharp and assessing, set in a face that seemed familiar in a way she couldn't place. He touched the brim of his cap in a small greeting before returning to his work. Over the following weeks, Maya began to notice a pattern. The man, who went by Jake, according to his name tag, always arrived at exactly 5 a.m., just as Maya was finishing her clandestine baking. He worked the dining area first, then moved to the kitchen around 6:15, right after Mason arrived and claimed credit for the morning's croissants. But Jake didn't clean like other members of the crew. He lingered near the pastry station, ostensibly wiping down surfaces while his eyes tracked every movement in the kitchen. Maya caught him studying the ingredient storage area, noting which products were used and which remained untouched. Once, she saw him discreetly photograph a delivery invoice that Mason had left on the counter. The questions started small and seemingly innocent. "Those croissants sure are popular," Jake mentioned one morning as he emptied the trash near Maya's station. "Must take a lot of skill to make them that perfect every day." Maya tensed, wondering if he'd somehow discovered her morning routine. "The head chef is very talented," she replied carefully. Jake nodded, but his expression remained curious. "Been working here long? You seem to know your way around pastry better than most." It was an odd comment for a cleaner to make, and Maya studied his face more carefully. There was something calculating in his casual questions, as if he was fishing for specific information rather than making small talk. The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning in February. Maya had arrived earlier than usual, 3:30 a.m. instead of 3:45, because she wanted to experiment with a new glaze technique. She was deep in concentration, whisking together honey and cardamom, when she heard the familiar sound of keys at the employee entrance. Maya quickly switched off the lights and hid behind the mixer, her heart racing. But instead of retreating footsteps, she heard someone enter the kitchen. A beam of light swept across the walls, and she realized with growing dread that whoever had entered was searching the space methodically. The light moved closer, and Maya pressed herself deeper into the shadows. Then she heard something that made her blood run cold, the sound of someone photographing the kitchen equipment, the soft click of a camera phone capturing evidence of something. "I know you're in here." The voice was quiet but firm, and Maya recognized it immediately. Jake, the mysterious cleaner who asked too many questions. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was he working for Mason? Had the head chef finally discovered her morning routine and sent someone to catch her in the act? "I'm not here to get you in trouble," Jake continued, his voice echoing softly in the darkness. "I'm here because I think you might be able to help me with something important." Maya remained frozen, barely breathing. "I know about the croissants," Jake said, and Maya's heart nearly stopped. "I know you're the one making them every morning. And I think I know why." Slowly, Maya emerged from behind the mixer, her hands trembling. Jake stood near the pastry station, his baseball cap removed, revealing a face that she now recognized with shocking clarity. She'd seen it in the company newsletter, in the framed photo that hung in the corporate office lobby. "Mr. Davidson?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Richard Davidson, CEO of Golden Crust Bakery's parent company, smiled grimly. "We need to talk, Maya. I've been investigating some irregularities in this location. Recipe theft, ingredient discrepancies, timeline inconsistencies in production reports." Maya felt the world spinning around her. The man she'd been watching clean floors for weeks was actually the head of the entire company. "I don't understand. Why are you here? Why are you dressed like a cleaner?" Davidson finished. "Because sometimes, Maya, the only way to see what's really happening in a company is to become invisible. And what I've discovered over the past month is very troubling indeed." He pulled out a small notebook, not unlike the one Mason had stolen from her, and flipped through pages covered with notes, timestamps, and observations. "I've been documenting everything. The fact that perfect croissants appear every morning before the head chef arrives. The discrepancy between reported ingredient usage and actual consumption. The way you handle pastry techniques that supposedly only Mason knows." Maya stared at him, afraid to hope, afraid to believe that someone in power might actually listen to her story. "I have a feeling," Davidson continued, "that Mason Crawford has been taking credit for work that isn't his. And I think you're the proof I need to expose what's really been happening here." Maya stared at CEO Richard Davidson for a long moment, her mind struggling to process the surreal turn her morning had taken. 3 years of silent suffering, 3 years of watching her creation be credited to someone else, and now the most powerful man in the company was standing in her kitchen at 4:30 a.m., asking for her help. You believe me?" she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion she'd kept buried for so long. Davidson's expression softened. "Maya, I've been in this business for 25 years. I know talent when I see it, and I know theft when I smell it. What I've observed over the past month doesn't add up. Mason arrives at 6 a.m. to find perfect croissants waiting for him, yet he reports making them himself. The math doesn't work." Maya felt tears threatening to spill, but she fought them back. This was her moment, perhaps her only chance to reclaim what had been stolen from her. "I have proof," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I've been collecting evidence for 3 years, waiting for someone who would listen." "Show me," Davidson said simply. Maya led him to the massive walk-in freezer at the back of the kitchen. The industrial unit hummed quietly, maintaining its steady 0-degree temperature. She moved past shelves of frozen ingredients and pre-made doughs to the very back corner, where a stack of supply boxes created a natural hiding spot. "I had to be careful," Maya explained as she moved the boxes aside. "Mason has access to employee lockers, and I couldn't risk keeping anything in plain sight." Behind the boxes, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and stored in an airtight container, was Maya's secret archive. She pulled out the container with reverence, like an archaeologist handling ancient treasure. "This is everything," she said, opening the container on a nearby prep table. The first item was a manila folder thick with papers. Maya opened it to reveal copies of inventory sheets dating back 3 years. "These are ingredient requisition forms," she explained. "Look at the dates and quantities. Every morning I bake, there's a corresponding spike in rye flour and cultured butter usage. But Mason never orders these ingredients for his other recipes." Davidson examined the sheets carefully, his business mind immediately recognizing the pattern. "You've been tracking ingredient consumption against production schedules." "Every single day," Maya confirmed. "At first, it was just frustration. But then I realized I was building a case." The next piece of evidence made Davidson's eyebrows rise. Maya pulled out a small stack of photographs, pictures she'd taken with her phone of her croissants at various stages of production. Each photo was timestamped, showing her work in progress hours before Mason's arrival. "I started documenting my process after the first year," Maya explained. "Every fold of the dough, every stage of proofing, every batch that went into the oven. Look at the timestamps." Davidson scrolled through the photos on Maya's phone, noting the 4:30 a.m., 5:15 a.m., and 5:45 a.m. timestamps that preceded Mason's 6 a.m. arrival by hours. But the most compelling evidence was yet to come. Maya reached deeper into the container and withdrew a vacuum-sealed bag containing what looked like frozen croissants. "These are from November 12th, 3 years ago," Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper. 3 days before Mason stole my notebook. I made a test batch using my perfected recipe and froze them as samples. They're identical to what the bakery sells today as Mason's Heritage Croissants." Davidson stared at the frozen pastries, understanding the implications immediately. "You have croissants made with your exact recipe from before Mason ever claimed to have developed it. DNA evidence in pastry form," Maya said with a bitter smile. The final piece of evidence was the most personal and perhaps most damning. Maya pulled out a small, waterproof folder containing printed emails, dozens of them. "I was so excited about my recipe development that I documented everything in emails to myself," she explained. "Look at the dates, the detailed descriptions of my lamination technique, the notes about rye flour percentages. All sent weeks before Mason's breakthrough." Davidson read through the emails, his expression growing darker with each page. The emails were incredibly detailed, describing not just ingredients but techniques, temperatures, timing, and even Maya's emotional journey as she perfected her creation. "This is comprehensive documentation of intellectual property theft," Davidson said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with corporate malfeasance before. But Maya wasn't finished. She pulled out one final item, a small recording device. "I've been recording conversations for the past year," she admitted. "Nothing illegal, just interactions in public areas of the kitchen. Mason often brags about his techniques when food bloggers visit. Listen to this." She played a snippet of audio where Mason's voice could be heard explaining the croissant lamination process to a visiting journalist, using exact phrases from Maya's stolen notebook. Davidson listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. When the recording ended, he looked at Maya with a mixture of admiration and anger. "Maya, what you've compiled here isn't just evidence of recipe theft. It's documentation of systematic intellectual property fraud that could have serious legal implications." "It gets worse," Maya said quietly. "This isn't the only case. I've noticed similar patterns with other junior staff members. Sarah's sourdough starter technique that became Mason's artisan bread. Kevin's chocolate tempering method that turned into Mason's signature truffles. I think he's been stealing ideas from multiple people for years." Davidson's expression turned thunderous. "How many others?" "At least 4 that I can prove. Mason has built his entire reputation on stolen innovations from junior staff who were too intimidated or powerless to fight back." The CEO stood silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what Maya had revealed. This wasn't just about one stolen recipe. It was about a systematic pattern of exploitation that went to the heart of the company's creative culture. "Maya," he said finally, "you've just exposed what might be the biggest case of intellectual property theft in our company's history. This changes everything." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated investigation and mounting tension. Maya watched from the sidelines as CEO Davidson transformed from undercover janitor back into corporate executive, but his investigation remained deliberately invisible to Mason and the rest of the kitchen staff. Davidson worked with surgical precision. He brought in external auditors disguised as routine corporate reviewers, introduced new quality control specialists, who were actually forensic accountants, and scheduled what appeared to be standard performance evaluations that were really depositions in disguise. Maya continued her morning routine, baking croissants at 4 a.m. while wearing a small recording device provided by Davidson's legal team. Every interaction with Mason was now documented, every casual conversation about recipes and techniques captured as evidence. "Beautiful work as always," Mason said one Tuesday morning, examining Maya's croissants with the proprietary air of ownership that had once made her stomach turn. Now it just made her angry. "Thank you," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She knew that in a few days, that condescending smile would be wiped from his face forever. The trap was set when Davidson scheduled what he called a Innovation Showcase, a company-wide presentation where department heads would demonstrate their signature techniques for the board of directors. Mason jumped at the opportunity, seeing it as a chance to solidify his reputation as the company's culinary genius. Maya watched from the kitchen as Mason prepared for his presentation, rehearsing his explanation of his lamination technique and practicing the casual confidence he'd perfected over 3 years of theft. He'd even ordered special ingredients, the exact rye flour and cultured butter that Maya had been secretly purchasing for her morning sessions. The presentation was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in the bakery's main demonstration kitchen. Board members, regional managers, and senior staff gathered to watch Mason showcase the techniques that had made Golden Crust famous. Maya was asked to assist as his prep cook, a request she accepted with barely concealed anticipation. As Mason began his demonstration, explaining the inspiration behind his heritage croissants, Maya noticed Davidson standing in the back of the room, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood a woman Maya didn't recognize, impeccably dressed with the sharp eyes of someone used to asking difficult questions. "The key to my technique," Mason said, working the dough with theatrical flair, "is understanding the precise relationship between rye flour and cultured butter. It took me months of experimentation to perfect this ratio." Maya's hands clenched into fists as she watched him perform her techniques, using her measurements, explaining her innovations with the casual authority of ownership. "Could you walk us through your development process?" asked the mysterious woman beside Davidson. "How did you first discover this combination?" Mason launched into an elaborate story about European inspiration and late-night experimentation, weaving fiction with just enough technical detail to sound credible. Maya had heard variations of this story dozens of times over the past 3 years, but hearing it in front of the board felt like watching someone finishing her professional reputation in real time. That's when Davidson stepped forward. "Interesting," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made the room fall silent. "Maya, could you explain the lamination technique Mason is demonstrating?" Maya's heart hammered as every eye in the room turned to her. This was the moment, her chance to reclaim 3 years of stolen credit in front of the people who could actually do something about it. "The fourfold lamination creates 256 layers," Maya began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The rye flour percentage is exactly 12.5%, and the cultured butter must be pounded to 65 degrees Fahrenheit for optimal incorporation. The proving time is 18 minutes at 78% humidity." Mason's face went pale as Maya continued, describing technical details that hadn't been part of his rehearsed presentation, measurements that existed only in her stolen notebook and her memory. "Those are very specific parameters," Davidson noted. "Mason, could you explain why those exact specifications are crucial?" Mason stammered, trying to maintain his composure, but Maya could see the panic in his eyes. He memorized the performance of her techniques, but he never understood the science behind them. "Furthermore," Davidson continued, pulling out a tablet, "we've been conducting a comprehensive audit of recipe development timelines. Maya, could you tell us when you first developed this particular croissant recipe?" "November 9th, 3 years ago," Maya replied without hesitation. "I documented the entire process in emails to myself, photographed each stage of development, and even preserved sample croissants from the original batch." The room erupted in murmurs as Davidson displayed Maya's evidence on the presentation screen, the time-stamped emails, the photographs, the inventory records, all pointing to intellectual property theft on a massive scale. Mason's face crumbled as he realized his carefully constructed facade was collapsing. "This is ridiculous," he protested. "She's a junior baker making false accusations to advance her career." "Actually," said the sharp-eyed woman beside Davidson, revealing herself as the company's head of legal affairs, "we've identified similar patterns of theft involving 4 other junior staff members. This isn't about one recipe, Mr. Crawford. This is about systematic intellectual property fraud that has exposed the company to significant legal liability." Within an hour, Mason was suspended pending investigation. Within a week, he was terminated. Within a month, criminal charges were filed. The investigation expanded like ripples in a pond. 2 board members who had been complicit in covering up earlier complaints resigned in disgrace. 3 regional managers who had ignored junior staff concerns were demoted. The entire company implemented new intellectual property protection protocols and anonymous reporting systems. But for Maya, the sweetest moment came 3 weeks later when Davidson personally called her into his office. Not to question her or investigate her, but to offer her something she dreamed of for 3 years: recognition. "Maya," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk, "we need to talk about your future with this company. And I think you're going to like what I have to say." 6 months later, Maya Johnson stood in the main demonstration kitchen of Golden Crust's flagship location, but this time she wasn't hiding in shadows or working in secret. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating a small plaque beside the pastry station that read, "Maya's Heritage Croissants Original Recipe by Maya Johnson, Head of Product Innovation." The title still felt surreal, even after all these months. Head of Product Innovation, a position created specifically for her, with a salary that allowed her to move out of her tiny studio apartment and into a bright 2-bedroom place where she could finally set up the home kitchen she'd always dreamed of. But the real validation came every morning at 4 a.m., when Maya still arrived early to bake. Not in secret this time, but as part of her official duties. The company had embraced her early morning routine, recognizing that the quiet hours before dawn were when she did her best creative work. "Good morning, Maya," called Janet, the morning supervisor who now treated her with the respect due a department head. "The team from Food and Wine magazine arrives at 10 for the feature interview." Maya smiled, tying her apron with the same care she'd always shown, but now without the weight of stolen dreams pressing down on her shoulders. The Food and Wine piece would be the 5th major publication to feature her story this year, the junior baker who exposed corporate intellectual property theft and revolutionized her company's approach to recipe development. As she began measuring ingredients for her morning batch, Maya's mind drifted to all the changes that had rippled through Golden Crust since Mason's downfall. The company had implemented the Maya Protocol, a comprehensive system for protecting and crediting junior staff innovations. Every recipe development was now documented with multiple signatures, timestamps, and legal protections. More importantly, they'd established the Innovation Recognition Program, where junior staff could submit original recipes for official review and potential adoption into the company's product line. 3 new items had already been added to the menu from submissions by previously overlooked employees. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, the former junior baker whose sourdough techniques had also been stolen by Mason. Sarah now ran her own artisanal bakery in Milwaukee, using a business loan she'd received as part of Golden Crust's settlement with affected employees. "Saw the preview of your Food and Wine interview online. So proud of you. Coffee next week when I'm in town?" Maya typed back a quick reply, still amazed that she now had a network of fellow bakers who looked to her as inspiration rather than competition. The scandal had created an unexpected sisterhood among Mason's former victims, all of whom had found new paths forward. The morning routine began as it always did, Maya's hands moving with practiced precision through the lamination process that had become her signature. But now she worked with a team of 3 junior bakers who observed her techniques, asked questions, and contributed their own ideas to improve the process. "Ms. Johnson," said David, the newest member of her team, "I was wondering about the proving time. Would higher humidity create even more defined layers?" Maya paused in her folding to consider the question seriously. Under Mason's regime, junior staff questions had been dismissed or ignored. In Maya's kitchen, they were the foundation of innovation. "Interesting theory," she replied. "Let's test it with the next batch. Document your hypothesis and we'll run a controlled experiment." This was her favorite part of the new job, nurturing the same curiosity and creativity that had driven her own recipe development. Maya had instituted a policy that every team member's contributions were credited by name, whether they improved an existing recipe or developed something entirely new. At exactly 6 a.m., CEO Davidson appeared in the kitchen doorway for his weekly check-in. The undercover janitor routine had ended, but he'd maintained the habit of early morning visits to Maya's department. "How's the team doing?" he asked, sampling one of the morning's croissants with the appreciation of someone who now understood the artistry behind the perfect pastry. 3 new recipe variations in development, Maya reported. David's humidity theory might revolutionize our proving process, and Lisa has an idea for incorporating local honey that could create a seasonal variation. Davidson nodded approvingly. Maya's department had become the most productive innovation center in the company, generating new products at twice the rate of any other division. The board meeting is next week, he reminded her. They'll want an update on the Heritage line expansion. Maya's Heritage line had grown from her original croissants to include 6 signature pastries, each carrying her name and story. More importantly, the line had inspired similar recognition programs at other companies, creating industry-wide changes in how culinary innovation was credited and protected. As Davidson left and the morning rush began, Maya watched her croissants disappear from the display case with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with sales figures. Each customer who bit into those flaky, perfectly layered pastries was tasting something that bore her name, her story, her 3-generation family legacy. Her phone rang, a call from a culinary school asking her to give a guest lecture on intellectual property rights in the food industry. Maya added it to her calendar, thinking about the young culinary students who might one day face the same challenges she had overcome. At 4 p.m., as her shift ended, Maya looked back at the kitchen that had once been her prison and was now her kingdom. The afternoon light caught the brass nameplate on her office door. Maya Johnson, Head of Product Innovation. But her favorite moment came the next morning at 4 a.m., when she unlocked the kitchen door and turned on the lights. Not as a thief stealing moments to practice her craft, but as a recognized artisan arriving at her rightful place. Maya Johnson still rose before dawn to bake croissants, but now she did it with pride echoing in every fold of dough, knowing that her name would forever be connected to the beauty she created. And in the quiet moments before the world awakened, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice whispering approval in the rhythm of the mixer and the gentle hum of the ovens.